Hello, everybody. This is Rebekah Freedom, and this is episode number 59 of Heard Not Seen, produced by John Beethan. Today's topic is how to deal with the shit show that is life. Well, you know, there's going to be some show notes, so make sure to check them out at the end of the episode and hang out till the end of the episode to get a special offer.
And where's that website?
The which one?
Where the show notes are.
Oh, heardnotseen.com. Heardnotseen.com.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So thank you for listening. If you have been following, please share this with friends, family members, your dogs, whoever. Today is World Mental Health Day. The world needs some mental health. The world does need some mental health. There are some serious flare-ups going on in California, i.e. the Napa fires that have taken out 2,000 structures, killed about 20 people so far. Obviously, Houston's still recovering from the floods and the hurricane. Florida's still recovering. I mean, can you imagine? There's hundreds of thousands of people that have been displaced. It's almost like this really interesting karma in America of saying, we will not take any more refugees, no refugees. And yet now we have a country full of refugees, American refugees who have been basically kicked out of their home. And that might be a little dramatic to say, but think about being displaced. Think about not only in our physical sense, but spiritual, emotional, mental, and physical displacement. Just fucked, just out of alignment. So I just want to jump in real quickly with a little encouragement and take it from there. My friend posted this beautiful meme on World Mental Health Day, and it says this, mental health isn't a race. You don't need to be sick enough to get help. Everyone deserves compassion and understanding. You never know how much someone could be struggling. Kindness is so important when hurt is on the inside. Sometimes it feels like no one can see the effort you're putting in or the progress you've made. You're doing so well and have come so far, which is so awesome. You are so much more than your mental health promise, being me. And then lastly, it says, asking for help can be very scary, but reaching out is so important. And you're a total champion, even if you're just thinking about asking for help. Okay, here we go. I've had major panic attacks, like all day, heart-wrenching anxiety. And John so kindly pointed out to me the other day, well, go for a walk.
In nature.
In nature.
The great balancer, which we seem to be systematically removing.
Yeah. And I live in a place where nature is literally out the front door, down the driveway, eucalyptus trees, dirt pathways, plenty of beautiful landscaped housing around me. And I've gone on that walk several times. But anxiety can carry paralysis to it, where you literally freeze up, and it's almost like I become Rain Man to the degree of like Wapner's on 5. And over this last month, I've created this really interesting morning ritual that now I'm going to have to break and create a new habit. So the morning ritual was to put my alarm clock on at 6 o'clock, pretending I was going to get up then, turn it off, listen to binaural beats or listen to some sort of like positive words on YouTube, and then wake back up around 7-ish, go to the bathroom. And then immediately I would have my tarot card decks out on the floor as if they were some sort of actual communication, magical thinking authority. Now, granted, what I'm aware of, and you said this, is tarot card decks have a way of sort of reflecting whatever the most dominant energy is for you. They're actually more of a mirror than a predictor of things. They can kind of reveal to you what your soul's asking for in the moment. And so I found a lot of really encouraging messages. They did help me carry through, but now it's become sort of this habituation, this obsession in the morning, this true habit where I recognized today, and this is part of a mental health loop, is we have really particular stories, very particular self-talk that we go through. And today, the code, like each day, there's a little bit more of a message where the code has been cracked for me. And, you know, someone what I'm aware of, and I talked about this on another podcast, that I'm a bit like Taylor Swift in that the boyfriends that I date should probably sign an NDA, a non-disclosure form, because inevitably they become my muse. They become sort of very much my reality and what I'm focusing on and how I'm the filter of which I'm learning the world in. And so on this day, I'm not quite sure if, you know, the person who's taken up so many episodes is going to listen to this, but I really felt like, you know, in some ways I owe that person an amends, because sometimes very private happenings end up being public forum. And to that point, I'll say that we can only know what we know when we know it. And hindsight can be a cruel bitch, because not just 2020, but you can look back and understand, oh God, I really should have not said that at that time, or shared that at this time, or sent that email, made that correspondence happen. So, pardon. So mental health, let's really kind of talk about dealing with the shit show that is life. Every single one of us has gone through some sort of challenging transition. Everyone. Now, when you first are falling in love with somebody, this is a fact that gets anesthetized by our hormones. We think, oh yeah, anybody I date, they're going to have issues, but if I love them enough, no big deal. We'll work through this together. And sometimes there are people that are really lucky enough to find that person that will walk with them. We met a girl today at the coffee and her name was Polish, and she talked about being with her partner for 10 years, and they ended up having met each other by bumping into each other in San Diego.
Her name's Kashka.
Kashka. Merci.
Actually,
yes,
we could use her image of the tattoo on her back as the episode artwork.
So look for that. And yeah, possibly. Again, that point to what is private and what is public. And I think very much part of our mental health disorder is that we don't know anymore. I'm guilty of it. Because of social media, the lines of what is sacred and really private and should be kept between two people turns into gossip, turns into something you post on social media. You date somebody new, all of a sudden you're a couple on social media. You go through a breakup, then you post about that. It's like this, what was once our journals, you know, our very private, sacred journals have now become public domain. We have, in some ways, we've made it public domain. And I think that's driving us crazy, because what we do is we share these intimate parts of ourselves, our pictures, our events, and we get no feedback. We actually don't have an intimate connection with the person or people we're sharing it back. Maybe a like, maybe a comment or two, but that's not the same as actual intimacy. And prepare to go on a tangent with me, folks, down this place of, I guess, what I would call wisdom and perspective. And John, feel free to jump in on this, is that When you're a teenager, people can't tell you the right thing to do. They can't. Don't do drugs. Don't sleep around. Just anything that has to do with the man or the system or structure, right? We rebel against it. And thank God, because we need artists and innovators to actually push beyond the system. But you see that, I would imagine, as a parent or somebody else who's gone before, you look at that and you're like, I know what's going to happen. There's going to be pain there. It's going to be painful.
A little tidbit, psychologically speaking, the human brain has a tendency not to comprehend the word don't. Yeah, Rebekah's smiling because she knows this is true. So when you tell your kids, don't do drugs, all they hear are, do drugs. Don't do this. All they hear is do this.
In terms of volume, but don't just as a way of cranking the volume to say, do it even more.
Yeah, it really is.
Do it even more. And so mental health is a bit of a oxymoron. It's a bit ironic because when you're saying mental health, we generally don't talk about what's healthy. We talk about mental health, i.e., the disorders. And in the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistics Manual, which has all the coding for our behaviors and thought patterns, there's two primary categories, which is mood disorders and personality disorders. And then you have, medical explanations and acute and chronic disorders. So mood disorders are things like general anxiety disorder, bipolar, which we're really familiar with, mania, manic disorder, and PTSD is a mood disorder, post-traumatic stress syndrome, which is an acute event that overloads the nervous system that turns into these chronic checking behaviors. Obsessive compulsive disorder is also a mood disorder. So if you just sit back and have a cup of tea and read through the DSM, at some point you're going to identify some strategy, because a disorder is basically a strategy that worked once or twice, but then got stuck in place and just became autopilot, just for lack of better terms. So I'm going to share some of my mental health strategies. And then there's personality disorders, narcissism, hypochondria, antisocial disorder, schizophrenia, and borderline, half psychotic, half neurotic personality disorder. So a personality disorder is not just a coping mechanism used once and then got locked in. It becomes the sort of overarching dominant way that the person navigates this world. Narcissism really being like, I can do no wrong. And the narcissistic wound tends to be one of the greatest wounds there is, where we cover it up with hubris, with pride, with using people, with transactional relationships. And people often miscategorize people as narcissists. Like, quite frankly, we're all wired for self-preservation because we're animals. We're really animals. We're wired, no matter how altruistic our behaviors are. And in fact, in Freud's list of coping mechanisms, projection, deflection, altruism is one of those, where you become sort of this like, you just play the role of the giver to protect yourself from ever getting hurt.
That's the definition?
Yeah, you can actually really use altruism as a coping mechanism to say, I'm going to stay in the giving role. I can't ever receive any gifts, any compliments. No. It's all about you, not me. And I've played in that, and then ultimately it breeds resentment And so the mental disorders spread.
Interesting.
So, of course, the field of counseling psychology, has done many tests. We've gone through different theories, from Freudian to Jungian, which is psychoanalysis, the id, ego, the superego. Then we got into not Rudolf Steiner, to Skinner, B.F. Skinner, who did more behavioral things, where we were looking at Pavlovian classical conditioning. Then we moved out of the 50s classical conditioning, and started to examine more existential things, Gestalt, positive psychology, which gave birth to what we know now as the proliferation of coaches, and strategy and cognitive behavioral. So think differently, and that will change your behavior, or change your behavior, and that will make you think differently.
So is that where the Brene Browns and the Byron Katie's exist? If we're doing labeling.
That's something I would have to fact check, but certainly positive psychology was sort of like a lean towards. Obviously, there's other things like Imago Therapy, which is by Viktor Frankl, who he had a thing called will to meaning, and he was somebody who came out of the concentration camps, and there are several, Imago Therapy, logotherapy. Pardon, I would have failed if that was a test question. So let me go back and review in my sort of Polish psychology voice. So going back, it's actually called logotherapy by Viktor Frankl, which is will to meaning, how the story of the man in the concentration camp said, I did 3 things to survive. I always kept time. I made sure to bathe myself, and I made sure to tell myself what's being done to me is wrong, and keep my dignity intact. And so Man's Search for Meaning and Man's Ultimate Search for Meaning are his 2 books. They're really absolutely, I think, a necessary read to make sense of the shit show that is life. So, and if you want to go into deeper, the shit show that is life, add life plus relationships, romantic relationships, you're going to want to go into Harville Hendrix's, that is Imago Therapy, which is when you do this, it makes me feel, and you get into these deeper steps of really understanding approach, avoidance behavior, your characteristics and interactions. And because we're so interested in how to react and interact with one another, to relate with one another, there are some clever people who have come up with personality tests, such as the MMPI, the Minnesota Multiphasic Test, where you get like INFJP or those types of different categories of how you strategize and relate to the world. There are also tests such as the Gene Keys, and also Human Design is another one of those. Certainly astrology and numerology are different ways of viewing your human, the way that you show up in the world. So that's just sort of the mental health, menage, the foundation, the sort of a buffet of mental health information, if you will. But I want to talk about it from more the perspective I learned at Naropa, and to really kind of talk about this in the intensity of the anxiety that I've been experiencing, which I'm experiencing right now. And you may be able to hear that in my voice a little bit, is anxiety. Lao Tzu has been said, anxiety is the preoccupation with the future, and depression is a preoccupation with the past. And our saving grace is the present moment, is to be able to come back into the present moment. So I want to talk about the pattern of when I would wake up in the morning. I was very much driven by, and that's why I wanted to make amends, but I was very much driven by loss of romantic relationship. loss of sexual relationship, loss of touch, loss of camaraderie, loss of exchange with that one person. Now, granted, life is what it is and it unfolds how it unfolds. He came into my life quite by accident and exited quite on purpose. So that has been a ringer. And as loss or major transitions do, breakup, death of a loved one, moving, job changes, financial, career, they have a particular way of inciting mental mood disorders, sometimes personality disorders. So for me, I currently I'm dealing with the residuals of PTSD from the loss, I believe it is the loss of my father and the loss of my mother. So to put this into really clear terms, the two corpses I've seen, the two dead bodies I've seen in my lifetime have been my father and have been my mother. And I really don't know, but by the grace of God, honestly, what got me through that period of time is when my father died, it was during spring break, and then I had to go back to school. So I naturally was focused on finish just the syllabus in every semester and finishing the semester. And when he went back, I was drinking and I was wearing a lot of black, and I went from a 3.5 GPA to a 2.6 GPA. But nonetheless, I still managed to plug in, and school carried me. Also, I met my dear friend William at that time, and he made out with me, which also was helpful. But thank you, William. So my dad died in 2000. Fast forward to 2007. My sister is in high school. My mom is teaching school. She had just finished her master's, and she left South Dakota to move to California. Falls really ill, goes into the hospital. They find her colon had ruptured because she had colon cancer, and they didn't catch it on time. And so it would have been stage maybe 2 cancer, which would have been preventable, but it went and metastasized very quickly. She died within 4 months of being in the hospital. Her hospital bill was $1.6 million, and she did not have insurance, so we declared bankruptcy. And we brought her home in hospice care, and at the time, I had blonde hair, and I looked like Einstein because I couldn't sleep. And I was the one out of all the family members who became her advocate during that time. And so I had to give her morphine as her eyes turned purple, and she stopped breathing. And the death rattles came with her lungs filled up, and she died exactly at 11 a.m. in the morning. And she just went. And this is a hard story to tell without crying. And that was the point that I became an orphan, without either parents here. Certainly I have the fortune of having a big Italian family, but 2 years after my mother died, my grandmother, the matriarch, died. And my grandfather of my dad's side of the family died in 2010. And so after grandma died, Clara died, the family fractured, more or less. There was a lot of resentments that came up, and somehow I carried on. I ended up I had a boyfriend at the time my mom died, and he ended up being a cheating bastard, but nonetheless, he stuck around long enough for me to get my bearings underneath me and broke up with me as I was in grad school, the first year of grad school. So I had grad school to carry me through. And I went through a handful of other relationships, and it was always so challenging when they came to an end, as breakups are, and my pain has become my purpose as a breakup specialist and counselor. And that you see so many people where that's the truth, the disease they got or the molestation that happened, they turn it into advocacy. And I really am an advocate for broken hearts. I get you. I understand. And this time around, I basically went 4 years without really dating anybody. So there wasn't an attachment. There was more of just a mild irritation and struggling with dysthymia, which is low-grade depression. And then all of a sudden, I very cautiously proceeded to get into a relationship and or sexual relationship. And what I'm experiencing now is not just the acute effect of having someone say, you know, this is not the right fit for me, which we all deserve to choose for ourselves, but it's the compound effect of that. And so I want to talk about anybody who's depressed or anxious or suicidal, which I've been all three, and is really suicide most of the time is the thought, I want this feeling to end, not that you actually want your body to cease to exist, that you want this feeling to end, that you want your will to meaning to come back, that you want your purpose to reignite itself, that you want to feel like you matter, and you want to be able to love, to have someone receive the love you have to give, but also to be loved like you're needed, not to be shamed or your love to be tampered with or to feel like you're not enough. So this is very much one of the core components of why I struggle with anxiety and why I struggle with mental health, is because when I did have a mom and dad, when they were here, my mom would lose her shit and scream at me that I was worthless. And my dad would cheat on my mom and leave us and put it on my shoulders at a very young age, asked me directly after having an affair with my best friend's mother. At age 9, he came to me and after the fight was over, he said, do you want me to stay or do you want me to go? And that got ingrained in my system, and to the point of I'm responsible to be the good girl that keeps dad around. But I'm never going to do a good enough job because mom thinks I'm worthless. And I share all that to say that you never know the struggle behind the face you're seeing. Like, even as a counselor, I walk my talk. I live with an open heart and I take risks and I try to put myself out there and then I try to put myself back together. So I'm with you. I'm with you on this mental health day of struggling through whatever you're struggling through and whatever strategies you're using. I've definitely had to use pharmaceutical strategies. I've used marijuana strategies. I've used going to concerts. I've joined 12-step groups. I have got energetic healing. I reach out to my friends when I'm particularly struggling. And I'm fortunate to have so many. But I feel like one of the things that's missing is that daily affirmation of someone being like, you're doing a good job. If you got out of bed today and you showered, you're doing a good job. If you went to work and even if you hated it, you're doing a good job. If you got in a relationship and got your heart broken, you're doing a really good job. You tried. If you're in a relationship and you're uncertain and you feel discontent, you're doing a good job. You're just learning with the skills that you have. And to the point of working on oneself, the detriment of self-development is we forget we're perfect. I forgot that I have a good heart and I have a good soul and I have good intentions, and they're not always delivered perfectly because I need practice. With each new person I meet, I need practice, and I need more than 3 months. I need quite a bit of time to practice because life has made me a different person at a lot of different turns where I had different coping mechanisms and different awarenesses and different tools. And I need practice, and we all need practice to be able to communicate our best selves, to be able to show up our best selves. So this is where grace and mercy comes in. To say, whomever you believe in, God, Brahma, Atman, higher self, that there's a part of you that knows that despite the challenges, despite the hurt, despite the childhood you had, despite the breakups, despite the drug use and the getting sober, despite the mental disorders, despite being afraid if the check's coming in the mail so you can pay rent, despite if there's food on the table, no matter what, there's a guiding force saying, you belong here. It's not an accident. It's not an accident that you should be in the body you're in and living the life you're in. And granted, there are people born into severe poverty. There's people without water. There's people without shelter. There are people struggling so much more in this world. But I will say that doesn't matter when you're in the grips of anxiety, when you're in the grips of depression. Don't expect anybody to understand, but expect there to be a grace in that moment. Because I have found that just beyond anxiety and just beyond depression and just beyond someone not choosing you and just beyond you not being able to choose the person who wants you to choose them and just beyond that job that was paying you so well but making you miserable, there's always something else. There's always another opportunity to practice and to grow and to be real and to try again. And don't be hard on yourself. You're doing a good job. So life is a shit show. It is a fucking 3-ring circus where we're all scared shitless at our core and pretending that we're not and hoping we can make a connection and hoping for a sense of wholeness. So as I share this with you, I don't know what your struggle is. I just know there is one. And I know self-development will tell us oftentimes, raise your vibration, think differently, feel differently. And sometimes you just can't. And for those moments, the most effective thing to do is to reach out and ask for help. And I'm here as a listening ear. There's also the suicide hotline that we'll put in the show notes to say you're not alone, no matter your struggle. I offer support with Breakup, but if you're also struggling with anxiety or depression, I encourage you to reach out to me at RebekahFreedom.com. That's REBEKAH freedom.com. Again, for all the information we talked about today, please go to the show notes at heardnotseen.com. This is Rebekah. Be set free.